Now we've talked about streaking grimes and stuff like that a little bit earlier. And this is a good time to go ahead and get started on some of those. For instance, like these little bolts and rivets right there. So what we can do, similar to how we did it onto the roof of the vehicle using the rust colors, we can take these dirt brown colors. In this case I'm using this rocky streaking effect, which is this kind of green gray color. And all I'm going to do is start establishing some dirt runoff marks. And we're going to do it the same way as we did before. We're just going to put it on, and then we're just going to let it sit for a minute because it has to establish itself, and then I'll blend it away. And so we'll do a few here. We're just going to get some things going here. Maybe just kind of run off the back of the... And you can kind of see already that there's some variations of color going up and down here. And that's what I did with the oil paints earlier on, a couple of steps ago. So now we're adding the same effect, but we're trying to simulate dirt and water runoff. Let's say this one right here. We'll just go ahead and start a few right there. Actually, we'll use a brown streaking grime instead of that greener color. Just going to go ahead, touch the area, and pull downwards. And I know it looks kind of funny right now because we're just basically drawing this mark there, but again, we're going to blend this away in just a second. While we let these streaks dry over here, we're going to just kind of work in real time here for a little while. So I want to come back in and start building up these colors and get them really established so we can really start putting our weathering effects on here in a second. So what I'm going to do is basically I'm starting now with light to dark as I go through this particular process. And I'm going to start, and this time we're getting a little bit more particular. We're just going to kind of hit some of these bolt details and things like that, and we're going to start getting some of these shapes established in areas of weathering and dust. So I'm just kind of dropping these in. In this area right here, it's kind of hard to see with this light. There we go. You can see I've got a nice patch of color from the last application, so I'm not going to enhance that now. We've got a nice dusty spot here, so I'm just going to come down in the middle and give it some purpose right there. That's a big accumulation, and maybe it's kind of up against this post here and kind of drops back in there a little bit. That's going to be fun to play with a little bit later. Again, here we were playing with this dark and light. I'm going to enhance the light part of it down here. Just kind of dropping it in there a little bit. And let's do a little bit more light down in this area here. So I'm kind of working balance between these two parts. That's part of what I'm doing here as well. I want to make it interesting in all parts of this. A little bit around here. Almost kind of like define that edge a little bit with the white color. You can see this application is a little bit more precise, and that's what we're going to do. We're looking for. We're going to kind of tighten this up as I go through here. Remember how we talked about sketching versus drawing? Well, we're getting closer to drawing now. So in this part here, we wanted to reestablish some of this dust accumulation in this area. And I want to establish some dust accumulation in this area as well. Keep in mind, I know I just wiped a lot of this off, and you can kind of see it. There's just a little bit of hint still here, and that's exactly the way this process works. You just kind of establish in your fields, and you go back and reinforce them. And so we'll go like this, bring that field out this way, and on the top up here, I want to make these a little bit more pronounced as well, but I want to be careful I'm not just putting too much color there. So I've thinned it slightly with my turpentine, or my thinner I should say, my white spirits. And I'm kind of doing that same thing where I'm just tapping it and letting the spirits kind of drop it around a little bit. Like that. A little bit up here as well. And make that little patch a little bit more pronounced. And let's say around the radiator up here too, we've got a little bit of stuff going on, so I'm going to kind of drop it in there like that in these corners. This bolt right there is it's a nice way just to kind of accentuate a little bit of detail. We'll come back in again with more color and make these look a little more realistic. See how this is going here. Add a little more color in this area, and let's make this a little brighter here. I'm going to change colors a little bit. Some of this I want to do while they're wet. And in this case, so along the back edge here, I want this to kind of blend, so that's what I'm doing wet on wet right now. I'm just kind of tapping in this dark effect to get a little bit more moist, gritty, appearance here. Just kind of do that. around my corner too. Something like that. And I can do the same thing down here. I'm going to establish areas of darker over the lighter a little bit. I'm just kind of working my way around here. And I'm just going to put some thinner along this and let this kind of run through. Okay, so I spent a little bit of time kind of fleshing out some of these details here with the mud and dust colors that we were using before. You can see how I've really expanded these areas in here. So, and of course we've run these colors all along this area throughout on both sides. What I've done is I've used our engine grime here, which is a dark grayish kind of color, and put it a few drops right around that fuel area there, the fuel cap, as if we've had some spills. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this fuel stain color, which is kind of this amber clear, and that's simply just going to give it a little bit of a wet appearance and change the stain colors. And the reason I did part of this first is because I needed that first layer to be dry before I did this layer.
Right, so you put down the grime first and now this.
Yeah. And of course we can do it if we do it without that. So this will end up showing like dirt accumulated in the moisture, and give it that kind of effect. But if we do it like places like this will just kind of show like stains that are just showing up where we spilled. And maybe drag this off a little bit as if it's running down the side here a little bit. So you can see we could do all sorts of little fun things like this as well. You don't want to go overboard with this kind of thing. Just have a little bit of fun. I don't know if you remember, we added some of those streaking grime. Well, I've gone ahead and blended those in, and that's kind of the final effect of that. Just looks like we've got some rain marks coming down, so the dust is washed down. Here we might accumulate a little bit more around the bolt head. It makes a little dirtier stain. So we just got a little bit of that going on in all sorts of different places. I've also done that across here where I've washed the dust down along this surface. So I've trailed down around the horizontal sides.
Right.
Add some extra staining around this area. Again, just using the washes. That would be the track brown wash that I used on this one. It's kind of a reddish brown color. So again, we're just kind of following the washes by color, not so much by name. So let me grab this dark mud color, which is this really dark muddy brown color, and we're going to start making some splashes and splatters on this thing. So we're going to look at this area right here, and obviously these tracks are going to come around and they're going to splash mud up along the back here, especially if it gets a little bit of speed. So to simulate that, got my loaded brush, thin slightly with some thinners, just so it's a little bit easier to go. And I'm just simply going to flick this. It's going to flick up. Gotta get the right angle here. You can see it flicking up the side of the back of the vehicle here. There you go. You kind of see it splattering up the side there. I'm having a little bit of a difficulty with the angles, just to make sure we get it on the camera. Of course, right through here, this is going to splash off across from the tracks, and so we're going to come and add some of these splashes in here. And that's actually kind of more the effect I want, with the little smaller splatters.
Right.
There you go. I don't need full coverage or anything right now because we're going to come back and do this in layers. So like down in here, we'll go ahead and kind of add some of this as well. But we're going to come back in just a few moments with some pigments. But again, right now we're really just still laying foundation colors, but now we're starting to get a little bit of texture into this in terms of real life splatters and splashes. A little bit on this back here. Whoops. Right now, since the colors are all still wet, it's really hard to see the differentiation between what I did before and what I'm doing now. Ideally, you'd want to let these dry between steps. Okay, so this is dried off just for a minute. Use the hair dryer on this. You can see our splatters are starting to show up a little bit better now. So now I'm going to go ahead and go into one of the lighter colors that we're using for the dust. So basically I'm just replicating the same colors that we used up here and we started with before, just the exact same colors, but the application technique's a little bit different. do this right-handed, I'd do it a lot better. In places like this, which doesn't look quite right to me, just touch the top and let these things kind of bleed down a little bit. And kind of clean it up a little bit. And I was noticing this area here, I got some splatters way up on top here. Well, the reason these rain marks happen in the first place is because something would splatter up and then the rain would wash it down. So we can kind of do that just right now ourselves. So we just kind of pull some of these drops down. Just kind of fade them out, but this is how they would occur in real life anyway. And the next thing we're going to do, kind of jump straight ahead to pigments. I'm going to talk about pigments for just a second here. So here's a selection of pigments I brought with me today. These are from the AK Interactive company. Some other companies, Vallejo, MIG Productions, also make some pigments as well. And basically all they are is powdered pure color. There you go, there's the powdered color. And what you're looking for in a pigment is basically a real fine, this needs to be stirred up a little bit, but just a fine granule that's all consistent color, no impurities, no white blobs in there or things of other color. And they're incredibly versatile and they're incredibly good at simulating dirt because they've got a bit of texture. If you buy the right colors like we have here, they are the dirt colors that we need to use. And we could talk a little bit real quick about how we apply pigments. There's basically 3-4 different methods and how these work. The easiest method to do this, I'm going to do this on the bottom so we don't really mess up everything, is simply to apply them dry. And to do that you would just simply do this and basically give yourself a layer of dust. And this is good if you want a layer of dust because you can see it just kind of does what dust does, goes everywhere, but it's very hard to control and it's kind of hard to get it specifically where we want to go. So in certain applications this will work fine. One of the problems, if you want to call it a problem, with this type of application, as you can see, it comes off very easily. There's nothing to adhere it to the surface except for just whatever tooth the surface has. Which brings me to another point. Pigments are best applied on a matte finish, which this is from our primer layer, but you can see it doesn't really adhere. But what you can see it's doing is that it's doing a very good job of discoloring or staining our primer. So this is, again, a very good effect for light dust or discoloration, but not really so much for accumulation.
Right.
Okay. The other method of application is to use some sort of a liquid as a carrier. And actually I'll show you a couple ways of doing that. Apply some pigment to the surface, and then you can use either water or white spirit, and you come back in and you dip it in and you paint it around. So in essence, as you can see, your pigment being pure color is basically the same type of a product that paints are made out of initially. This is just the dried form of paint. So if you put linseed oils in it, then it would also become an artist oil. If you put the enamel carriers on it, then it becomes enamel paint, and so on and so forth. So we're really working with a very powerful substance here. A little goes a long ways, and so you have to be kind of careful, especially if you're going to add a color into it, or a carrier into it like this. The benefit of adding a carrier like this and turn it into almost a paint is that we have a little more. See, we can move this around and keep things where we want to leave it. When this dries, it comes right back to the exact same color. Actually, I might be able to do that for you here pretty quick. It comes right back to the same color as it started out, so it'll dry to this exact same color. And that's a good thing about these pigments. And then the third way, which is kind of an offshoot of this particular method, would be to take your pigments, put them in a little separate area here, and do that mixing.
But do it off the model.
Off the model.
Right.
And this is actually the way I prefer to do it. And then you get it with kind of a paint. You can use a small brush like this, and I can apply my pigments right around, similar to how we did our enamel paints. The carrier kind of helps distribute it, in this case white spirits, and it goes around. It goes exactly where you want it to go. And then, again, when this dries, it dries right back to the regular color. The best part about using, or a good part about using white spirits in particular versus water, and let's talk about adhesion a little bit. So the first time we applied it straight to the surface, you saw it wiped off very easily. If we were to mix it with water, either on the surface or separately, that's the next best level of adhesion. Water helps it stick to the surface just a little bit better. white spirits are very good at that. So the stuff that's on here now, once it dries, it'll stay here pretty well. Now it can be removed. You can take a brush and you can move it around and get rid of the excess, but it's not as susceptible. You can't blow on it and it's not going to go away or anything like that. The third or the final way, if you really want these pigments to stay, is that companies such as AK offer a fixer. And a fixer is a type of an enamel finish. It's a solution that permanently adheres it onto the surfaces. And you can, again, do it the same way as I did it before. Do it separately or do it onto the surface like this. One preferable way, and I'll just demonstrate it using spirits because I have that handy. Let's just say you want to build up accumulations. This is something we're going to do, actually, but I'm just going to demonstrate it here so you kind of follow what I'm doing. Say you want accumulations of mud. You want it to look all nice and chunky like that. Well, then you do that, and then with your fixer, you apply right to the side of it here, and you allow the capillary action just to come across it like this. And when that dries, you can see it's not really affecting the pigment. You're not touching the pigment, you're touching next to the pigments. You're just going to flood that area and let that wash over it. And then eventually it will. It's starting to creep in. But as that soaks into the area here, and then after it dries, all this volume, all this shape that we've got onto this, all that crunchiness basically, that stays. Just like that, just like real dirt. So this is an absolutely fantastic way of replicating dirt clods, accumulations of dirt, and things on our models.
Yeah, like a bulldozer.
Like a bulldozer, and right. Or tractor is like we have right here. Mm-hmm. So we're going to use this type of a method quite a bit on this model on the lower parts, the tracks, and down here where the dirt's going to accumulate. But I wanted to show you on the bottom here so you can get an idea. And I actually can see what's happening. You can see it's drying back to the original color. So that's what happens. I'll play around here just a second here. This is a good surface to kind of demonstrate a few things. So as I was saying, we know that these were adhered with using the white spirit. And you could see with a brush, I can brush it away. Mm-hmm. And that's a good thing. But I can't blow it away.
Right.
So they are fragile. So this tends to be towards the last part of when you're working on your models because you don't want to put your fingers in this and stuff. But this is a good method for adding some dirt. You can see how I'm feathering this away, and you really can, you're basically almost pushing particles as if you were pushing dirt particles. And you can see how that's accumulated. Very effective way of showing dust. Very effective way of showing accumulated dirt and mud. So we're going to flip this back over, and we're going to start doing just that. So I've got the first color, the more yellowish orange color is they call this North Africa dust. This color they called European earth, a little more gray color. We've got a light dust over here, and we got a dark earth, which is kind of a reddish color. That's a nice color. And actually many times to make dust, so right now I'm just putting each one in a separate tin. But believe me, I'll be mixing these around. This light dust is probably very, very white, and it is. And sometimes, this is black, and a little black goes a very, very long ways. Sometimes I'll darken my colors slightly using the black, but you want to be very careful with black, because otherwise it'll just make everything black. So move that aside, and I've got another color here from Meg Productions. It's called, appropriately called mud, and or dry mud, I guess. There. And that's kind of a color that complements, so you can see my range of colors coming around here. And what I'll do now is mix up using the center section here. And again, I'll be using white spirits to do my work today. So I got a little puddle here, and this is going to go kind of messy, but that's just the nature of what this does. So I'm going to go ahead and start on the lower areas and work my way up this time. So I'm going to grab a little bit of this dark color and add to this. Mix that in there. That's pretty dark. I'm going to add a little bit more though because I want to do both sides without having to remix. And that's good. And I'm going to lighten that slightly with this gray in here. And you can see I just got kind of a paint now. And with that, I'm just going ahead and out of these areas. So all this work we did with the paints before, that's basically a base color of paint. So now we're coming over the top of this and we're just going to add some of this grit to it. So, and because I'm using that carrier, I'm allowing it just to kind of slide around where I need to. So I'll kind of work my way around using this dark color, kind of replicating the same areas I've already laid color, the dark color from before. Just kind of letting it sit in here.
This was your foundation.
That's my foundation color, but this is going to start adding a little bit of texture and volume to it. And again, we'll be able to clean these up as we go along here. And then we'll do, much like we did with those other colors, we'll be able to flick these in areas too to add a little more texture to what we're doing. So I'm kind of reaching in here just to make sure I got some coverage back there. If you were doing this for like a competition or really taking your time on this, you would certainly have spent a lot of time getting these areas back there all nice and up to shape as well. So I'm going to flip this over real quick. And before I run out, I'm going to go ahead and mix just a little bit more using those same two colors. And this area here. Down here. You can see this little mark right here. That's where I've rubbed off some of the paint in the photo it's just showing through. If we had more time, we would spend a little bit just fixing that up, but we're not going to worry about that today. And again, you want to be logical with this, just like we were doing with all the other things. Obviously these tracks are coming around and they're pulling up dirt, and the dirt's coming up here, and then it probably goes kabunk right back down here. Like I said, these sliders are made for this dirt to kind of slide down the sides here, so we'll just kind of streak it a little bit like this. And then you can kind of enhance it like that. Got some dirt accumulating in this area here. Again, this is our darkest color, and we'll apply other colors to this as we get along here. I'm going to add some. This is showing you how much pigment I have on this. Not really that much. So as I'm going across here where I've already got those really light splatters and stuff, they're not being covered up. They're just being kind of, we're dodging in and out of them a little bit. This pigment fix isn't all that thick. The last place we want to really get to this is the back. I'll just kind of dab that in there.
Okay, well, so we're going to let it dry, I guess, now?
Yeah, well, let's dry for just a second. Okay, so I've just taken the hair dryer to this real quick, and you can see we've got some accumulation starting here of the pigment. And like I said, we could, if we decided to, if we decided we didn't like the way that looks at this stage, we could just kind of work and brush some of this away. But at this stage, we're probably too early to even worry about that, so we're going to go ahead and keep moving along. Change the color slightly. Now I'm going to go ahead and hit this middle color here, and I'm going to make a lot of mud actually with this, probably this combination here. The lighter colors I think are going to look better on this vehicle, show up a little bit more. Grab some of this as well. But as I'm going through here and getting color, I'll grab from here this one color and here this little bit different color, just so to make sure that I'm always kind of moving around with this. So I'm just going to go ahead and keep working on this up here, but these colors will be slightly different coming down the middle. But similar as we did with the colors on the top of the tank here with the paints, these underneath colors will start showing through just subtly as we move up. So the story I'm telling here is that the mud is wettest underneath and drying towards the top as it's been exposed to the elements. But you could certainly reverse the order, so you'd have mostly dry mud, but it's splashed up and made just spots of wet mud. But that's the story I'm telling, and sticking with it. And you can see I'm kind of avoiding the tracks right now. We're going to do the tracks separately. We'll do them a little bit different method. But once you have that first layer of pigments on there, now we've got something for this to really bite into. You can see that I'm kind of dabbing, and this thick mixture here is a little bit thicker than my first one. So it's really biting into here now. I can dab into it and make kind of accumulations. They'll stack up slightly. So I'm just going to do this. And I'll give you one more little trick here if you want to. Let's say you want to punch up the color here, add a little bit of texture. You can come into your palette and add, like with dry, and stipple that right onto that.
Ah, that looked nice.
Yeah. So we could do that in certain places too to kind of change the color. And I'll give you a couple other. Real quickly, let's just run through a few techniques here. We'll do it on the other side just because I have a clean palette. We could take our Kursk earth color, do it out of the cap. We could lay some of that into this area here. Now keep in mind, this is an enamel color, so it's going to dry, and it's going to dry hard, right? It's going to be permanent. But what we could do, say we want to change our color slightly, we can do this exact same thing. We want to turn that color into something. Well, we just move some of our pigment in here and stipple right over that color. Now we're blending that Kursk earth color with this mud color, and then the enamels itself will actually make this permanently adhere to the surfaces. You can do the same thing with oil paints. If I was, say, working with oils and earthen tones oils,
right,
I can lay oils down on this, then tap my pigments into there and give those effects the same way. This is an incredibly powerful technique. And like I said, it keeps things
using
permanent.
enamels and then later pigments.
Yeah,
right,
while they're all still wet. And then you're sure this is going to be permanent. We could even take this a couple steps further. Let's say we wanted to show an area of moisture in here. So I've taken, now it's my earth effects color, which is a little darker.
The enamel as well, yeah.
Little enamel. Let's make a puddle right there. So now, right now, that enamel color is staining that particular area, but let's go ahead then and also, and we'll use the darker color pigment in that area. So now, between the two, when this dries, this will kind of show as like a little moisture spot in there, a little stain.
Right.
Like that. And then since my brush is loaded, I can actually kind of stipple here. So I got a little bit of moisture from that area still on here, so I can still use that in other areas. So you can see how versatile this is, these pigments. You know, don't think of them as just a separate thing you add at the end. They're actually part of, you know, incorporate it, implement them with your other tools, your other paints. Like I said, if you're using oils, continue to use pigments over the oils or within the oils or the enamels, or separately like we've been doing as well. But this is an incredibly powerful step to do, and this will actually transform this model to looking like it's really been working in the earth. So give me a few minutes and I'll kind of catch up with everything here. I won't do anything fancy. I'll just continue what I'm doing here.
Right.
We'll come back and I'll get everything basically to this level here. Then we'll start adding highlights, and then I want to address the tracks, and we'll do that in a separate manner. Okay, so we're back, and I've got my mud effects pretty well underway on the lower areas here, so I'm going to go ahead and take care of my tracks. There's a couple other things I did. I added some pigments up in these areas as well, just using that really thinned out method I did earlier with the spirits. Mm-hmm. And now we're just going to go ahead, and I'm going to go ahead and make a pretty significant paste on this as a place to start. There's a couple of different colors in here. Same colors as we were doing before. And there we go. And what I want to do now is just give these a liberal coating. And because I'm using so much thinner, I'm actually trying to use thinner here quite a bit, because what I want to do is promote this to get down into the cracks and crevices. So even tip it on the side. And I'll just kind of put this in here. It's the same as before. I'm just kind of liberally putting it in here. I'm not worrying about necessarily totally even coverage, just complete coverage. Again, this is going to be our base. I'll run a little bit on the interiors of these things as well. Let me make a little pause here and get one tube of paint, and then I'll come right back. Okay, so I brought my trusty tube of paint here. I have no idea what this is. This is how long oil paints can last. I probably had this 40 years, and as you can see, I'm still using it. What it is basically is a raw umber color, just a real dark, rich brown, but it's like this perfect mud color. So what I'm going to do is basically what I was doing before with the enamels down here, but I'm going to go ahead and use this as my agent instead. And I'm just going to come right down through the middle here. And this is something that we were talking about earlier, where we might do something linear on the tracks versus horizontal. Now, we're not quite sure how realistic this might be, but we're going to go with it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Now, keep in mind that oil paints take a long time to dry, so this will be towards the end, and you might have to use your imagination to actually see the final results. I'm not sure we'll have enough time before filming ends to finish this up. Now, I don't know if you remember, but at the very beginning of our conversation, we started talking about brushes and never throwing away old brushes. Well, this is one of my favorite brushes that's now an old brush, but I keep it because it's got this nice worn out front, but it's perfect for what we're doing right now. So I'm going to go ahead, grab some color, and mix these two together because these are two great colors that work good together. And we're just going to simply pat this. In this case, I'm going to go back and forth, but I'm picking up some of this oil paint as I go. And this will help it adhere to this surface. But that dark color will stay down the center as it dries. And as we get through this, you'll see that we end up with quite a caked on appearance, actually, because I've got quite a bit of oil paint on there. So it's really has a lot to give in terms of adhesion. We're just going to take some of our paint, tap it on this area. We're going to just let it kind of accumulate up, or dry pigments I should say, I'm sorry. I might mix the color slightly. I'm not going to stir the color, I'm just going to put a couple of different colors there. That's probably plenty. I'll use the adhesion properties of the oil paint and the spirits here, and I'll go ahead and just allow that to come down over the top of that. And when this dries, we'll have a little bit of staining from the oil paint, which will blend it nicely with what we just did right here. But then the oil paint and the spirits will simply just adhere this, and this crusty appearance that you have will just stay there. It'll have a lot of volume to this. So that fluid's just going to come down and take care of all of that here in a second. And then you just have to leave this alone for a while, and it'll come back, and you'll find out that it'll look like we have this really crunchy little section of mud. Matter of fact, at this stage, if you wanted to, you could put a little topical coat on this. Just say you wanted to change the color slightly, just put a little bit of crusty dry mud on top. That's what we do right there. And it just soaks right into the excess fluids, and it will just bond with the surface. If we pull, I'm going to slide this forward slightly. This is some of the pigments I did just a moment ago when I was still working on this stuff here, and you can see that they don't look realistic right now because they just kind of feathered differently, you know. So, but again, because these are on with spirits, I can blend these back.
Right.
And you can actually see the little dry pigments. I don't know if the camera's picking it up.
Yeah.
Brushing off the edge here. So now we can just make like little accumulations of dust. That's basically it. What we've done here, I mean, it's been quite a process, at least from my side. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. But we've been able to take basically a kit that you can buy off the shelf and of course do it that way. We've added to it by adding a resin kit conversion, the engine part of this. And then we went ahead and we found some reference photographs of a cool subject, and we went ahead and did some scratch building up here on the front and back here over on the hood itself. Now, if you remember, this is this is an example of how I got to the process, and I know that the producers here will give you some examples of the finished product, and you'll see where I've been able to take my time a little bit. The techniques are exactly the same. It's just a matter of taking my time a little bit, so they're a little bit tighter. You know, the construction's a little bit tighter, the engine's a little, you know, some of the things we talked about I've actually done on the other model, and you'll be able to see the difference of just taking just an extra moment of time, which I highly suggest to get this to do your projects.
Exactly, and I think it's a fantastic end result. It looks wonderful. So many techniques that we learned over the past 4 or 5 hours, however this long this DVD ends up being. But it's been a real pleasure here to film with Rick and learn all of these techniques. Many of them I have not seen before, and to see some of the different paints and materials that he's used. So, Rick, I want to thank you for coming into our studio and doing this tutorial with us.
Thank you. I really had an enjoyable time.
And I hope you guys stick around for even more training from your miniature training resource, Miniature Mentor. Thanks, guys.